Alright, hello everyone, how are you? Kyanite here. Obviously you can tell from the title of the video, this is going to be a bit of a video that a lot of people have requested up until this point. And it's quite a popular question in FM ranks, and the question is, how do you find the best regens? Or what do I personally do when it comes to finding regens? Now there's many ways to do this, and if you don't know what a regen is, it's a 15-16-year-old youth player who in theory has come up from your team's youth academy, and this is how the game generates new players, because obviously as Football Manager is a game that goes into the future, we don't know what 2-year-old or 3-year-old alive at the moment is going to be the next Lionel Messi or is going to be the next David Beckham, you know what I mean? So the game eventually runs out of real-life players and has to constantly regenerate these new computerized players. That is what a regen is, and obviously within your own little world, within your own little save, some of these will grow to become world class, some of these not so world class, and from your perspective you want to try and capture these youngsters when they're as young as possible, meaning they're as cheap as possible, and try and spot their talent early on to not only grab yourself a bargain and maybe sell him on, but maybe, you know, find yourself the next Lionel Messi, Maradona, or Cristiano Ronaldo, or maybe Pele. But anyways, back onto the point. So there's many ways to do this. Some which are more beneficial than others. The more beneficial ones, in my opinion, are the ones where you put a lot of time into them. But the truth is, not everyone has tons of time to put into searching for regens. In the past, when I had more time on my hands, I'm talking like FM11, FM12, I used to do the more in-depth regen scouting things. Now I don't do it anymore simply because I don't have the time, but I still find that it produces a decent return. So I'm going to discuss with you guys the two simplest and best ways, off the top of my head to be fully honest, that I use to find regens. And like I said, you will find other ways out there, some which might be better than the two main ways that I use, but time is a factor for me. Right, so a really good way is to try and find regens before they've signed full-on professional contracts, which means you can still talk to them on their youth intake day. Now, you might not know this if you're new to Football Manager, but each country, and this changes from year to year now, even though it didn't used to be like that in the past, which kind of made it easier, has a youth intake date, and this constantly changes throughout the future. So in this case, I'm in England, it's the 28th of February, 2018, and today's my youth intake day. And if you're wondering what save this is, it's my normal save. You can check it out on my channel. So, on the 28th of February, every English club receives a new intake of youth players, right? This date will be different for German clubs, this date will be different for Italian clubs, this date will be different for Spanish clubs, right? But what it allows you to do is when these youngsters come to be evaluated from your youth academy, the idea is that they're either on trial contracts, as in a player that one of your members of staff will have invited to the club to try and grab a professional contract, or a player from your youth academy who, you know, has been on a youth contract as a kid, but it's about time you kind of decide whether or not you want to sign him up properly. So if we take a look at this player, for example, he has come through my youth academy today. So attacking left mid looks okay. Don't think he's ever really going to make it into my first team. But the point is, we can go to contract and approach to sign. Why? Because he's only on a trial contract, right? And the same way we can approach to sign this guy straight off the bat, because he's not contracted to anyone, meaning we don't have to pay anyone a fee to get him. And because he's only 16, we can actually do the same to other teams' players on youth intake day. Now, you'll find that some teams will have already signed up their better young players on contracts. In my case, I'm at 6:54 in the morning. Going through teams, you might find that some really good players have already put pen to paper, and if you do, that's unfortunate, but you should still be able to talk to them, or in most scenarios you can still talk to them, and you can still offer them a better contract, even if they have already signed a contract, because 9 times out of 10 they've only signed a youth contract, which means that according to the Bosman rule, if you spot a player you think could become world class or you want to pick up, even though the team that he's just signed up for has signed him on a youth contract, because he's only on a youth contract, you can offer that club around 600, 700k in compensation, something like that, based on that kid's salary, based on his contract, to buy that kid out of his contract. And potentially, you've got to think in the future, right? So you're really unlucky if you do end up spotting a quality player who, you know, you'll have to pay 600, 700, 800 Ks compensation for. You're kind of like, do I really want to pay that much money for a 16-year-old? Well, if he really is as good as he looks, then yes, because a few years into the future, he might be worth, instead of 800k, 8 million, 18 million. If he's that good, 80 million. And that's the reason why this is a really effective method. So you've got to look at it from the perspective of, right, I'm Blackburn Rovers, right, at the moment in the Premier League. And basically, the way Football Manager works is there's a value for each team, and this value is called the reputation value. And I think it's the higher that value, the higher the reputation of your team. And this is something that the software within the game uses, as far as the AI of players is concerned, to determine which teams they want to. So we've had it in Football Manager before, where a player will decide not to go to a team because he doesn't think that team are of a sufficient stature to what he's looking for, and that stature is defined by a team's reputation. And that's kind of realistic, because Man United's reputation is nothing like Blackburn's reputation. And in order to build up that reputation, it's the same as your manager reputation. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about when I say manager reputation, it's kind of like when you go to your own profile. Reputation here, I'm only half a star. And you're like, well, why am I only half a star? And I'm a Premier League manager and I've won I've gotten promoted from the Championship. I agree, this doesn't really make sense, and it hasn't made sense for a while in Football Manager. But what I can tell you is that the reason why it's like that, irregardless of whether I agree with it or not, is because the progression in reputation is very, very slow in Football Manager. So it's not enough for Blackburn in this case to have finished second in the Championship, to have gotten promoted, and for us to maybe get a top half finish in the Premier League to significantly improve our reputation. We need to start consistently doing well in the Premier League over time, and then over time our reputation will then gradually increase. And the reason why I'm talking about reputation is because if I go to Chelsea, for example, go into their under-18 squad, see all these awesome youth players, and the way, even though I may not necessarily have time to scout all these youth players immediately, one thing I can do is sort these players by value. So suddenly we've got a 16-year-old Brian Jamal who's worth 875k. Click on him. Chances are this guy's probably going to be pretty damn good if he's worth 875k at only 16 years old. Now, it's up to you whether you want to scout him first, or maybe offer him a contract and scout him whilst he's trying to decide, or, you know, do something along them lines. But the point is, I can click approach to sign now and potentially snap this guy up. Only one problem: if he's really as good as his value suggests he is, right? And 875k for a guy who's on, who you know, he's on a youth contract already, he's just come in, he's only been in the game for like 6 hours, is phenomenal, wink wink, and that's probably a sign that this guy's going to be an awesome player. But even if I offer him a contract, chances are Chelsea are also going to offer him a contract, and he's going to turn me down, even though I'm higher than Chelsea in the Premier League. Why? Because that reputation figure behind the scenes is what the player looks at, right? So my point is, when it comes to doing this, be realistic with the players and teams that you look at. What you need to do is scout clubs, scout other clubs' youth intake. A good idea might be to go into the league below. So in my case, I might go into the Championship, if I can find it, the Sky Bet Championship, and think, well, who here has decent youth facilities? Brighton are one of them. So if I go into Brighton's under-18 squad, you can see I've already tried to scout this lad here, Daryl Jackson, 16 years old, 100 per week, still not being offered a contract. And if I then come along and offer him a contract, the chances are he'll accept mine over Brighton's. Why? Because I'm a Premier League side. Brighton aren't a Premier League side. And unless this guy's a Brighton fan, and he could be, well, he doesn't say he's a Brighton fan, he was born in Brighton, chances are he will then join me, right? And that's my point, basically. This is a really good method. Like I said, on Youth Intake Day, particularly, I like to stick in the country that I'm in. But one thing you can do to remind yourself about Youth Intake dates in other countries is basically to look them up on Google. I'll put a link in the description below if you like. And let's say Italy's Youth Intake Day is on the 7th of February, right? Or what comes after February? March. So you can come on your calendar, click this down button, click create a note with a reminder on this day, and then basically add a note to this day that says, hey, me, today's the German youth intake. And then you can go and take a look at I don't know, some half-decent German teams like Köln, who are actually are they in the relegation zone? Interesting. But yeah, you know, point stands, and then go and look in their under-19 squad on their youth intake day. And again, the reason why you want to try and get stuck into these teams on their youth intake days, because you want to snap up and offer contracts to these decent players before their actual clubs tie them down. Hopefully this all makes sense. And like I said, one tip would be, when you go and find these players in their teams, sort by value. Another option, if you want, and now this depends on how good your scouting knowledge is. In our case, we're a Premier League side, so our scouting knowledge actually ain't too bad. But what you can do is you can come into here, set contract status to youth, age at most 16 or 17, because a lot of regens do actually end up coming in at the age of 17. We'll stick to 16 for now. Then you got to show filters and remove realistic transfers, and then you can order players by £2.6 million. In our case, our scouting's pretty damn good in England, so we're actually getting most of the new regens listed here. But if you're a smaller club, a championship club, for example, when I was in the championship, we couldn't scout outside of Europe, right? So let's say the Brazilian or Argentinian youth intake day comes along. Boca Juniors, River Plate, teams like that have some phenomenal regens coming through every single year. But the point is, when you're a lower league side and you've got them scouting restrictions, you don't have that much world knowledge. You don't have that many players being listed here. I've got a lot of players because we've got a high knowledge in England, right? So I'm seeing most of these really good regens that have appeared suddenly today. But let's say you don't have that good knowledge, right? They won't appear here for you. Your scouting team, I put a lot of emphasis on my scouting. You might not be lucky enough to have that. So that's when it might become useful for you to go and manually do stuff. Particularly when you can't scout outside of Europe, for example, you manually may have to go and check out certain Brazilian players at certain times on the youth intake day, etc., etc. They're kind of both the same method. It's just different ways of looking at it. But both serve a purpose, and this is a really useful way to find regens. And to be honest, the more time you put into this, the better regens you'll find. But obviously, in my case, for example, I'm not going to sit and go through all these players individually, so I'm quite fortunate as a Premier League manager, as someone with a half-decent scouting team. I'll more than likely be able to start narrowing things down based on attributes, right? And really, it's that simple. That's how you can find regens. Another method, the second method that I'm going to give you, really good method. It's the same method I used to find Mohamed Traore. We always call him Toure, and anyone who's watching and following my Blackburn Rovers career here on YouTube will know exactly who this guy is. Question is, how on earth did I find this guy, right? We only have 33% world knowledge, and our knowledge in Africa is abysmal. How did I find this guy? I don't have enough knowledge for him to have popped up something like this on the Ivory Coast, Ivorian, yeah, youth intake day. How did I find this guy? The answer's simple. Go to countries you know produce half-decent players. The Ivory Coast, you know, they're still a very good national side. And this guy, when I signed him, I think this guy can become really good. Right now, his technical stats are only like a few off Andre Gray, who's my top scorer with 17 goals so far this season, yeah? So to sign this guy in 250k, I personally think is a steal. It's just a shame that he can't get a work permit yet. But I signed him from Africa Sports. I don't have anyone looking at bloody Africa Sports in League of the Ivory Coast Junior League. How the hell did I find this guy? Well, it's simple. You go to the country. I went to Ivory Coast. I looked at their under-20 side, ordered by age, and just manually looked through all these players. Even though you might not be able to snap these players up without paying for them, the chances are you're still going to get them pretty cheap if they've not been snapped up by another bigger club, right? And that's how I managed to get this guy for 250k. And I honestly think, worst case scenario, we're going to at least get a few million for him in the future. Looks like a tidy player, to be honest. And it's honestly a really simple method. If you're a championship side or something like that, you could go looking in the England under 18s, but chances are most of them players will belong to teams like Man United, Arsenal, etc. So go to countries like Algeria, countries like Ivory Coast, countries like Ghana, countries like Egypt. You know, these are countries that are producing decent players who you might be able to snap really young who don't even play in Europe yet. They play for their foreign teams. And if you're not even managing an English team, you don't have to worry about work permits, which makes this method even more effective. And those are the two main methods I use when it comes to finding regens. I don't take Football Manager anywhere near as seriously as I used to when I was younger, even though some people may beg to differ when watching my videos. But hopefully this video has taught you something new, and yeah, hopefully answers the question of what I do to find regens. And that is going to be it for this video. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you benefited from it. If I've taught you nothing new, then fair play. You must be a pretty good Football Manager player anyways, to be honest. Not saying I am, but you must have fairly decent knowledge to know the ins and outs of how regens work. And Football Manager, the community is growing every single day, that you do end up sometimes getting new players who can get overwhelmed by the concept of regens. But that is going to be it. If you like the video, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and most importantly, if you use a different method, and there are different methods out there that I've not discussed, it would be awesome if you made a comment and described your method, the advantages of that method, because other people that might come along, watch this video, they might be like, oh, I already know the two methods discussed in the video. They'll scroll down, look at the comments, and see your method, and they then might learn something new. But on that note, thanks for watching. See you next time.